So, as a fourth expert session, I'm really pleased to welcome Deloitte and Elodie van de Woestyne. So, Sergio will not come today, unfortunately, but we will have Elodie on stage. Elodie will highlight on how principal adverse impact indicators are considered in wealth management mandates. So, Elodie, I'll let you the floor.
Thank you, Laurence. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I'll try to have both hats and play Sergio's role as well. He apologized he couldn't join today. So I wanted to share with you today the results of a survey we did in January and February this year around how principal adverse impacts from the definition of the SFDR were considered by wealth managers. So it's more a distribution point of view, and we'll go through the PAI, so the principal adverse impacts, which cover not only the environmental or climate aspect, but also social and governance. But you'll see from the results that in the end, the climate indicators are the ones that are the mostly reported and used today. So just a brief overview of our survey. So it's a survey we did around Europe, so with participants from Switzerland, France, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Italy, and we gathered around 10 participants. And we tried to have, at the same time, pure players, but as well asset and wealth managers and global financial service providers. And the questions were of several types. We were trying to understand the type of methodology they were considering with the PAI, because the word considered is quite not very well defined in the regulation. So we were trying to see what was concretely being done by the private banks. And then the type of indicators, the number of indicators reported, and if there were differences between when they invest in single lines, such as equity, bonds, etc., and investment funds. So the first result is really that in the end, 90% of the respondents consider principal adverse impacts, which is, I think, a good news. And if we focus on the single lines, we find out that the exclusion methodology is the one mostly used, and more developed approach are for now not very well used by wealth managers. So the first, I'm sorry for the titles, the first result was around when the private banks are going to see their clients, what type of question they ask around the sustainability preferences of the clients. And we saw that more than 50% of the banks were having really basic questions to their clients, and principal adverse impacts were not at all considered or asked to their clients. Then the other half of the survey considered the principal adverse impacts. So most of the time through the questions that are now asked around MiFID, so whether the client has sustainability preferences, whether you want sustainable investment, taxonomy-aligned investment, or principal adverse impacts. However, we only saw that 2 or 3 participants were really asking detailed questions about the principal adverse impacts, and some of them were even classifying the impacts by category, so climate, social, biodiversity, etc. So the second fact was that we were trying to see a correlation between the SFDR classification of the funds, so whether the funds are Article 6, Article 8, or Article 9, with the number of PAIs that were considered in the mandates. And what we saw is that there's no real correlation between the two. If you see in this graph, in the end, I'm sorry, it's a bit hidden, the second column is about the number of PAI considered, and there's no specific correlation. However, there is a correlation with the methodology. So, oh, sorry. Yes. So the more ESG impact engaged the fund is, so Article 8 or Article 9, usually the more developed the methodology is when they consider the PAI. So often Article 6 mandates only consider PAI by reporting the values of the indicators. As when we look at Article 6 or Article 9, they calculate the value, but then they take actions. Either they exclude the investment because the value of one indicator does not match what they expect, or they compare to a benchmark, or they engage with the company to improve the value of the PAI. Looking at the type of PAIs which are mostly considered, we see here that the ones around the environment and climate are the one highly considered by the private banks. So around controversial weapons, fossil fuels, of course the greenhouse gas emission are quite well reported, and I think based on what we heard previously from Anna on the climate data, we see that it's not always easy to collect those data. That's why some data which are a bit more complex to collect around biodiversity, water, waste are less considered by the private banks. Just a conclusion on the methodology used. Here you see that in the end, really the exclusion is the mostly used. Why is that? Is because it's often part of the private banks that they have an exclusion strategy. So the bank itself say, I will not invest in this type of sectors or in this type of activities. So it reflects directly in their mandates. That's why they often use this methodology, whether then the momentum or best in class are way less used. An interesting question we were wondering ourselves was around whether if you as a client, you have a preferences to consider some principal adverse impact in your mandate, but the mandate is in Article 6, can it be offered to you? And the answer is that nearly none of the private banks are offering Article 6 products to clients with principal adverse impact preferences. So it's really only for the Article 8 and the Article 9 mandates. Okay. When we look at the fund themselves, we were interested in looking at how, when they invest in funds, the wealth managers were collecting the principal adverse impact and considering them. And we find out that they always, nearly all of them, consider the principal adverse impacts when they do the due diligence on the fund managers. So when they go to you and they will ask questions about how do you consider the principal adverse impacts of your investments, it's more a qualitative way for now. We don't see a lot of questions, more quantitative questions, but it's nearly done for all type of investment in funds. The second way is around the EET template that is now required at European level. So they would ask the EET template to their fund managers in order to consider the principal adverse impacts. The last way, which is only used by half of the participants, is a look-through approach. So whether the wealth managers calculate themselves the principal adverse impact on the underlying lines of the funds. And here, only half the market is doing it because it requires access, again, linked to data, to a lot of data on the underlying investments of the fund. So for now, it's not a very used practice. Then I'll conclude on a bit the outcome of the survey is that we classified the participants in 3 types of categories. So you see the front runners, followers, and laggards. Front runners, in the end, we found only one. I won't tell you who, but they were quite outstanding compared to the others because they only had Article 8 or Article 9 mandates, and they were considering all the principal adverse impacts, so from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, and with a very extensive methodology, so meaning for each indicators, they would compare these indicators either to a benchmark or an industry average, and they would take action, engage with the company to make it, to improve the indicators. So they had a very strong methodology. The followers are the ones which are starting to launch Article 8 and Article 9 mandates, which consider some principal adverse impacts, but with a quite simple approach, so most of the time only exclusion, whether the principal adverse impact indicators matches what they expect or not, and then they would include or exclude the investment. And lastly, the laggards, which are the ones which are thinking but have not yet launched any ESG or impact mandates, and which consider the PAI but more through their exclusion policy of their bank rather than internationally into the mandate. So I don't know if we have time for a few questions as well. So just if you want to know more, I have published on my LinkedIn account the summary of the survey, so you can access it freely if you want.
If you have 1 or 2 questions, it's okay. We have 2 or 3 more minutes, but not more. So, okay, I don't see any questions.
Was clear?
Yes. Thank
you very much.
Thank you, Elodie. So I thank Elodie for helping us to better understand principal adverse impact.
Apply now.